Thank heavens and thank you very much indeed for your time. You are the Managing Director of the City UK. Would you please tell us what that is first and how you come to be part of it?
Well, the City UK, it's a private sector body that represents the whole ecosystem of financial and related professional services in the UK. So it brings together companies across banking, across insurance, asset management, private equity, the financial sort of infrastructure like the stock exchanges, the training bodies, the lawyers, the accountants, everyone really who helps to make the success of a financial centre can be a member of the City UK. And we work obviously within London, but it's also important to note we go right across the UK. So 2/3 of the jobs in the industry are actually created outside of London, and 50% of the exports come from outside of London. So really the industry is important right throughout the UK.
So it's a little bit like a union for people in finance.
Yeah, it's sort of like an industry association that really helps us to come together to try and solve for the really important issues and to speak with one voice. And a lot of the work we do is obviously domestic, looking at how to make the UK competitive over the long term. But the work that I do in the international area is really focused on how can the UK continue to service the rest of the world. One of the things that has made the UK so successful over the years is it's the global place, the place that the rest of the world comes when it wants to raise capital, when it wants to access finance, when it wants to really tap into some of the expertise around risk management or around investment. And so having a really international outlook is really fundamental to the work that we do.
Presumably one of the attractions for the City UK to have you as its managing director is what is a varied experience around the world looking at various financial institutions and financial corporations. So you bring all of that to London.
That's right. When I was looking at this role, I was actually based over in New York during COVID times. And my career itself, I was born in the UK. My mother was Austrian. We migrated out to Australia. I ended up joining the diplomatic corps for the trade side of for the Australian government. I then worked looking after the operations as the trade commissioner in Germany, looking after Europe. I then had the opportunity to go to Delhi and work across South Asia, and then I ended up in New York looking after the Americas before I decided that I really needed to look at another opportunity, and I had been really drawn into the role of the private sector and financial services in terms of really trying to tackle some of the big global issues that we're all looking at the moment, whether it's some of the demographic issues we've got the challenges with, whether the push towards net zero. All of these areas are important roles for the financial services sector to really enable. And so I thought this would be fascinating, and I also wanted to get more exposure and understand a lot more about Africa, and I thought the links between the UK and Africa and the importance of Africa for the growth of the UK would be something that would be really interesting.
So from your vantage point, you really have a pretty good and clear idea, well, more than an idea, pretty good understanding of how these institutions work within any economy, what they bring and the ups and downs and so on, and that's what we're going to come down to. I mean, most of it has been in more advanced economies. So when we come to what happens in Africa, it would be good to have that kind of comparison. So let's start there really when it comes to what you're doing in Rwanda for the next couple of days.
Well, I'm over here for the UK Rwanda Business Forum, and it's really an opportunity to look at how the UK and Rwanda can partner together. And one of those areas is in financial and professional services. So as you grow an economy, one of the things you need to be able to access is finance. Companies need to be able to finance their growth and expansion. They might need to be able to insure some of the risks that they're taking in growing their business. They might need to tap into perhaps listings and capital raisings overseas as they look to grow even further. And these are all areas where the UK can really bring opportunities to the table. But at the same time, UK-based companies, they're looking for growth. And we all know that growth in developed markets has been very slow. But when you look at the average growth in Rwanda of between 7 and 9%, this is really attractive for companies who are looking at where they're going to find their opportunities for future success. And the young populations here, the fantastic sort of opportunities to service new consumers are something that's very appealing to the UK industry. So I think it's in sort of two parts. One is what the financial and professional services companies might do in their own right. So how they might come in here and start to offer their own services. But also, of course, financial services is a huge enabler of the rest of the economy. It helps to fund the new manufacturing plant. It helps the agricultural company to be able to do more food processing or packaging of its product. It helps to support the tech industry and that venture capital that it needs in order to be able to grow. So I think it's an industry that is important in its own right, but also very important to the rest of the economy and to our everyday lives when we want to send our kids to school, when we want to go and maybe try and buy a house, or when we want to get a car or a motorbike. All of the things we need, we need finance for that. And so I think it's one of those industries I enjoy working with because it touches everybody at some level.
Those are the main advantages you talked about, the young population. That's what outsiders will see, and they will come to do that. Let's have a look at what is actually having quite useful for the countries to which they're coming, in other words, the countries in Africa. One, what are the disadvantages? What are the sort of things that would deter them that countries might need to look at?
Yeah, well, anything that an investor looks at, regardless of where they go in the world, the one thing they really want is certainty. Because if they're going to be putting a long-term investment, whether they're building a new manufacturing plant or doing mining or setting up a bank, they need to know that if they invest the money, they have a real certainty. So one of the things we do at the City UK is to work with financial centres around the world to create the right business environment that investors are looking for. So that can be a number of different things. So it might be investor protection. They need to know that if they set up, that the ownership is going to be protected or that their IP is going to be safe. They might need to think about if there is a legal dispute, how does it get resolved? Is there a court of arbitration where they can go to have an independent group really look and help them to solve the problem that they might be having? They really love alignment of regulations and standards. Many of these companies are global companies and they operate in many countries. And it's just ease of doing business if countries like Rwanda or the UK can subscribe to the global standards, because then they know that they're going to be complying with all the requirements that they have, but only one set. They're not setting up, each country has got its own regulation. So that can be really important. And then the final thing, of course, is talent. They need the capability to be able to employ new people and create new innovation and new products. So helping to create that kind of ecosystem that allows all of these pieces to come together. Then you find that investors say not only is there growth and not only is there vision and stability, but there's certainty. And we know how business will work here, and we're really happy to come into the market. And so that's something that we work on. I always say it's like the runway. You need to have a really nice runway so that the aircraft can take off. If you don't have the runway, you can have all the planes you like, but no one's going to get up and into the sky.
Let me latch on to the idea of talent. Normally what happens in more advanced nations, you will get something that you will know about called the milk run, which is major companies will go to universities, set up desks and recruit people who know absolutely nothing about the industry in which they want to work, beyond having an interest to go into that. Now, the problem then comes when companies that want to come and invest, let's take Rwanda for instance, and they say, but is there the talent? Well, there won't be until you train it.
Yes.
So the question is, will they be willing to get into a country, take in perfectly bright young people, and just pretty much nurse them into being the talent that that industry wants?
Well, I think if the right attitudes are there, then absolutely. So, what I've really seen in the time I've been here in Rwanda is the youth population there, they're really motivated. They've got really high levels of energy. They've seen such enormous progress in the last 10 years or so that it's totally imaginable for them to see themselves in an international organization, working globally or staying here in Rwanda and being really successful. So I think the fundamentals are really good. And yes, look, I think companies are happy to train. And also, of course, from the UK, we have a whole range of technical training and accreditation bodies that work particularly in financial and professional services to give qualifications in accounting and auditing and corporate governance and AI and the ethical use of AI and coding and so on. So all of these are very fast-moving skills, and even if you've got staff in your workforce, you have to keep training them up. So I think that what we're seeing in many countries is a lot more partnerships between business and the universities, where there's a much more of maybe some people going from the business into the universities to help to run some of the courses or help to bring people through internships and secondments into the business so they get exposure to the kind of topics that companies are working on. And all of that means that as people are graduating, they're much more job ready, and there's already a really close connection between the kids who are studying and the companies that are going to need to recruit them.
You've mentioned the things that most major companies need, and actually even the small ones too. One can add on the legal framework and
Yes.
the confidence and the certainty that should they end up in court, they will have a decent legal system. Let's have a forthright and diplomatic thoughts on what you know that normally prohibits people from considering to go and invest in Africa. There are attitudes over decades, over generations. So what is there that, say, a country like Rwanda can look at and say, all right, that one, now I can tell you that you don't have to worry about it. What are the main worries?
I think, well, they come in a variety of forms. I think one has been, some of the political stability over the years, and I think Rwanda has done an amazing job at actually creating a very stable environment here. But that is obviously one of them. I think investor protection, there's other countries around the world where I've worked in where, there's companies have faced like nationalisation or appropriation of some of their assets. That really reduces investor confidence, not just for the company involved, but for other investors who then go, well, I might be at the same risk. You find in some countries IP protection is not very well held to. So companies think, well, if I come here and I introduce this new amazing green technology, maybe someone down the road will just copy it and I'll lose all my competitive advantage. So I think having those kind of issues can be a concern. I think capability is probably one that people do look at and say, we can see there's a fantastic young demographic here in Africa, but how do we tap into that? What do we need to do to make sure that, how long will it take us to build a workforce that we need? But the other thing that on the counterpoint that I think companies are very excited by is the entrepreneurship and the innovation. Because there's been many markets that I've worked in where there's just not been that sense of innovation, where maybe parts of Europe where there's so much tradition, there's so much legacy, that it's quite hard for companies to be, for young people to really set up businesses, or older people to set up businesses, and to be really innovative. So there's not many gaps in the market, so it's really hard to do that. So what I really love about Rwanda and other parts of Africa is there's so much unmet consumer demand. There's so much creativity here that I think companies that come from very established markets, whether it's the UK or other parts of Europe or parts of Asia, they can come to Africa and just see all this leapfrogging of technology, much more frugal innovations, new ways of doing things. And I think some of that is not just suitable for Africa, a lot of that can then be imported back into their other markets around the world and really help them to become increasingly fresh in their approaches as well.
Now, for all intents and purposes, as a modern state, Rwanda is really 30 years old, young. So there's an awful lot of really, I suppose, outreach, communication to people who are normally, I mean, the odd thing, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the interesting thing about your industry is that it does masses of stuff around the world, and it is pretty much into every economy in every country, but they can be quite insular because they're simply looking at their own things. They're just simply interested in what they're doing. So I would imagine that a lot of your members, for instance, know very little about Rwanda. So if I'm sitting in a relevant ministry in Rwanda, what do I do to get you to get all of those people to be as enthusiastic as you are when you've actually been to Rwanda and seen what it's like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you rightly say, the financial and professional services is probably one of the most globalized in the world. It's also one of the most heavily regulated, so it has to work with governments around the world. It can't come into a market and not engage with government and regulators because consumer protection is at the heart of, everything that it does. So I think there is an important role for government to be able to really look at how to build bridges between Rwandan and the UK government, and these kind of business forums are one channel to do that and then bring in business behind that. But I think being very targeted in the messaging. So, coming from a small economy myself in Australia, you can't be good at everything. So pick those 2 or 3 things that you really want to be known for, and have a really clear message about that, and then be picking those markets where you think you've got the greatest linkages. And the UK has a really strong tradition of engaging across Africa. That needs to be modernised and made new and fresh, but there is something to build on there. In a way that perhaps doesn't exist with some other markets. So I think there is a natural partnership, and what needs to happen is that both sides need to invest in learning more about each other. These business forums can be one way to do that, but more targeted exchange of, say, regulators can be helpful, or people from the ministries to go to each other's country and spend time there. In many of the places I've worked around the world, people might send someone from, say, their Ministry of Finance over to sit in the UK Treasury, or vice versa, for a few months, and then they learn a lot about how each other works, and that really then helps to stimulate the awareness of the opportunity. And businesses need to do the same thing as well. So I think one of the things that we really need to look at is how do we have really clear, targeted messages about the opportunities here for financial and professional services companies. And one of the ways we can do that is by partnering with groups that already exist. So whether it's the Economic Development Board, or whether it's groups like the Kigali International Financial Centre, these are already channels through which we can deepen our ties and educate one another about what's going on in each other's markets and how we can partner together.
There are 2, I would say, fundamental things that one can say about Rwanda for anyone who's been watching the country's development and the country's advancement. And that is, they would look at best practice and say, if we can do that now, let's do it now. And also, how can we make that translate into our own way of doing things. Those, I think, maybe policymakers might correct me how I'm wrong here, but I think fundamentally those are the two main things. So essentially they would say to you that, you know what, we're ready. So where are you? What would you say to them?
Well, I think organisations like the City UK are absolutely ready as well. So we work around the world with other financial centres. We bring in the expertise of the city and the companies that we work with to share experiences, to share best practice. And we've worked with financial centres in Astana, in Dubai. We're now working in Vietnam. We've done projects in Nigeria, in Kenya. And I think we would love to do something in Rwanda because it works for both sides. This is not a one-way street. The UK companies learn about the opportunities in the market. They become more familiar with how business is done. They learn how to innovate and develop solutions that are appropriate for the opportunities here. And at the same time, they can share their experience. So I think it can be a good two-way street. And because it's commercially driven by the private sector, for the private sector, it can be done quite practically and quite efficiently. So we obviously work very closely with government and regulators. They're absolutely core to our industry. But there's a lot business can do just in partnering together as well.
All right, so I don't really want to go into two different directions, but we've had quite a number of shocks since COVID-19, and then we had the Russia-Ukraine war, and now all of a sudden the Yemen and Gaza. How is that? Are you noticing anything coming within your industry and somewhat roiling it a little bit?
Yeah, look, I think not just for this industry, but everywhere. I mean, we've just seen geopolitical risk go through the roof. And on top of that, we've seen a lot of growing economic protectionism. Lots of countries, whether it's the US or others, really looking at sort of much more self-interested policies, where they're really preferencing their own companies over being a much more international environment. We've seen this idea of free trade really come into question, where people have said, well, maybe it hasn't delivered the economic benefits that were promised. And certain communities within different countries really speaking up against that. And so although for many countries there's been a huge uplift out of poverty from the ability to trade internationally, some pockets have been left behind, and I think we need to do more to make sure we can explain why it's important to continue to have those open borders and create those opportunities. And this year is a year of elections. There's something like 50 different major elections going on in Rwanda, in the UK, in the EU, in India, in Indonesia, in America. So this is really going to be a time where I think everyone's going to be a little bit cautious, looking at what does this mean? Are we going to see a continuation of this sort of fragmentation, maybe more economic self-interest? Or are we going to see perhaps a chance for people to really lift their voice and say, we would like a more globally connected world. We really do believe that there's opportunities for us to partner collectively to achieve better outcomes and address some big problems.
Interestingly, maybe we'll hear about it in the next day over the conference, but what we haven't heard about is the AFCFTA. And from an industry perspective, as far as you're concerned, this, it ought to be a huge, earth-shattering thing, but we don't hear much about it. What are your thoughts on that? What are your views on that?
Well, I think FTAs, in any way, shape or form, or forms of economic cooperation are really valuable. They really allow us to join up supply chains. They really help to make connections for business. So we would really welcome it. We think it's a great opportunity, especially for markets like Rwanda that may not deliver everything themselves, but by partnering with other countries throughout Africa, they can come up with a really strong value proposition. They can service other markets in the region more easily, and they can act as a really good sort of regional headquarters almost for international companies coming into Africa. So we would be very supportive of it. We think all of these kind of developments just really enable small businesses, to access markets that they'd normally never really get to trade with by making it easier and more frictionless. So in my world, they're a really good thing. And I think they're also a really good thing for women-led businesses, for entrepreneurs, this ability to really look at how you can identify pockets of markets in other countries that can take advantage of your particular solution. I mean, this has to be a good thing.
I was talking about the idea of insularity, people just simply getting their head down and doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is a perfectly good thing, but it means that you miss out one or two things. The other area that can be insular, government departments just too busy looking at what they need to look at. So again, coming to Rwanda, what would you say to them? What would you say to them now that you've been here, now that you've seen however much you've been able to see in the short space of time that you've been here? What would you say to them? How do you keep the conversation alive, and how do you keep them coming back to you and remembering that you're there and you remembering that they're there? How do you keep that conversation going? What would you say to them that are your really wish list?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to do this is just to have people-to-people exchange. If we build the relationships, then everything becomes easier. But one of the things that I think, the Rwanda has the chance to do that some bigger countries don't, is to really join up their ministries. Sometimes we get a little bit of a siloed approach. So, the one ministry that looks after finance, looks after the money, but maybe the people over here who are looking at digital transformation aren't as well connected, or the people who do the agriculture or the transport or the planning. All of this needs to really be able to be joined up. In an economy the size of Rwanda, that can happen a lot more easily. And I think the other thing that has really, that I've seen since I've been here that I've been impressed by is really the inclusiveness of the vision. So to keep finding ways to connect our SMEs. Obviously our big businesses, that's terrific, but really we're all trying to work out how to support our SMEs to grow and thrive. So as well as engaging, I think, at the big end of town, there's a lot of opportunity for us to do, digital business matching. So using the great digital transformation journey that Rwanda's on, really been investing in for many years, to try and say, how can we help to connect our business communities in new ways using some of these new technologies. And I think those would be two areas where we could make really good progress.
So lastly, the size of the market. What are the advantages and disadvantages of being a bit of a bijou market?
Well, I think there's one, you can be nimble, right? You can be nimble and you can respond to changes differently. You can also bring together all the different pieces of government or business community really readily in a way that is totally impossible in a market like the US, where there's all the different states and they all think differently, and the role of the national government is actually quite small. So these are really good strengths. It creates a shared vision, and that sometimes in many countries you're finding that just doesn't exist anymore. So that's a real advantage that small countries can actually develop. And I think these are things that Rwanda should really be looking at how it can lead the world on. And we've been seeing it really using its convening power to bring together African nations in the way that countries like the UK have been looking to convene around things like the AI summit. So I think we share quite a lot in common. And this really means that I think there are advantages. I think for UK businesses coming into Rwanda, it makes a great test market. So it's small enough that you can really roll out your business and see whether or not it works in quite a contained way, and that's a really good advantage. And it can also act as a sort of a headquarters. So you don't come to do business just in Rwanda, you come here to do business through Rwanda, and things that I've been seeing like double taxation treaties and some of the mutual recognition work in regulation that Rwanda has started to do around the region, I think is also something that as a small country it can move faster on.
So they're ready, you're ready, so presumably once you leave here, things can start.
I certainly hope so. That's always our ambition, and I think if we have the kind of open-mindedness and the willingness to actually really give things a go, then one of the great things about the private sector is it sees an opportunity and it moves. So hopefully we'll all be catching up with each other again soon.
Nice word to end on, Nicola. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.